The bubonic plague, one of the most catastrophic epidemics to sweep Europe in the 1300s. It was said around a third of all Europeans at the time died because of the plague. Back then, they didn't have things like pills or vaccines to keep them safe. So how did they attempt to protect themselves? Well, history fans of the modern day, do I have a tale for you today? Let's take a look at how Europeans at the time thought they could get by, and things that actually worked. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's go over what the bubonic plague was. The plague spread through the bacterium named Yersinia pestis, which would cause a buildup in a flea, which made it hard for them to digest anything. Once a flea bit into a rat, for example, because there's buildup, then they have no choice but to hurl back into the bite they took, spreading the disease in already disease-ridden Europe. Remember, back then, European society did not have any sense of sewage or garbage disposal systems, which meant everything was thrown in the streets. Free food for rats. Because of all the food and human waste, rats were everywhere, which meant the plague reached every single person in a city or town. This illness was broken down into three main categories: bubonic, septicemic, and pneumonic. There was a risk of death between 30 to 90%, and if death were to happen, it would happen around 10 days in. It's no wonder people tried everything and anything to protect themselves. Now we have a basic understanding of what the plague is. Here are some of the ways people tried to protect themselves. Number 1. Quarantines. Some cities and regions attempted to isolate themselves from the plague. For example, Venice implemented a quarantine system in which ships suspected of carrying the disease had to anchor offshore for 40 days before coming into the port. This practice, known as quarantina, is where the term quarantine originates. Number 2, fumigation and cleaning. People believe that foul odors spread disease, so they use various methods to clean the air and their surroundings. This includes burning aromatic herbs such as rosemary and sage, and use incense. Some homes were fumigated with substances like sulfur. Number 3, protective clothing. Physicians and caretakers who treated plague victims sometimes wore protective clothing such as long robes, gloves, and masks. The masks were designed with the long, beak-like snouts that were stuffed with aromatic herbs or spices, based on the belief that they would protect against the bad air through which carry the disease. Number 4, religious and superstitious measures. Many turned to religious practices for protection. This included praying, participating in processions, and seeking divine intervention through repentance and penance. Some communities engaged in flagellation, where people would whip themselves to atone for their sins, hoping to ward off the plague. Number 5, avoiding infected areas. People sometimes fled from areas that were heavily infected by the plague. Wealthier individuals often retreated to their country estates or less populated areas in hopes of escaping the disease. Number 6, avoiding contact. Some people believed that the disease was spread through contact with the sickness or their belongings. This led to practices like avoiding touching potentially contaminated items and maintaining distance from those who were ill. Number 7, public health orders. In some places, local authorities issued regulations to limit public gatherings and manage waste, based on the emerging understanding that cleanliness might play a role in preventing disease spread. Number 8, herbal remedies. Various herbal remedies and concoctions were used based on the belief that certain herbs and spices have protective qualities. These remedies often include garlic, vinegar, and other substances to have medical properties. Although many of these measures were based on misconceptions or incomplete understandings of the disease, they reflect the desperation and creativity of people trying to protect themselves during one of history's most devastating pandemics. I hope you learned something about the bubonic plague. Happy learning!